On the global stage, unexpected voices can sometimes spark significant conversations. Alexander Lukashenko, the often controversial president of Belarus, recently called for an immediate end to the Russia-Ukraine war. This plea for peace surprised many international observers. Lukashenko, a longtime ally of Vladimir Putin, has been a staunch supporter of Russia's actions in the region. His recent statement, however, suggests a potential shift in the geopolitical landscape. Alexander Lukashenko has long been a figure of controversy on the world stage. As the president of Belarus since its independence in 1994, he has ruled with an iron fist, drawing criticism from human rights groups and Western governments. Despite this, Lukashenko has maintained a close relationship with Russia, often aligning his country's policies with those of Moscow. This alliance has been particularly evident in the context of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Lukashenko allowed Russian troops to use Belarusian territory as a staging ground for their invasion of Ukraine. Born in 1954 in Soviet Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko's early life was far removed from the halls of power. Raised in a rural village by a single mother, he experienced the realities of Soviet life firsthand. Following his education, Lukashenko embarked on a career path that seemed to destine him for a life of anonymity. However, the winds of change sweeping through Eastern Europe in the late 1980s presented Lukashenko with an unexpected opportunity. As Lukashenko solidified his grip on power in Belarus, a parallel rise to prominence was occurring in Russia. Vladimir Putin, a former KGB officer, ascended through the ranks of Russian politics, eventually assuming the presidency in 2000. Despite their disparate backgrounds, Lukashenko and Putin forged a strategic alliance that would shape the geopolitical landscape for years to come. The foundation of their bond rested on a shared vision of a strong post-Soviet bloc that could counterbalance the influence of the West. Economically, Belarus, heavily reliant on Russian energy subsidies and access to its market, became increasingly integrated with its larger neighbor. While Lukashenko cultivated a close relationship with Putin, he also recognized the importance of maintaining a degree of autonomy for Belarus. He skillfully navigated the complex geopolitical landscape, playing Russia off against the West to extract concessions and maintain his grip on power. This balancing act, however, became increasingly precarious as tensions between Russia and the West escalated in the wake of the 2014 annexation of Crimea and the subsequent conflict in eastern Ukraine. Lukashenko, wary of becoming overly reliant on Moscow, sought to diversify Belarus's foreign relations. He engaged in a cautious rapprochement with the European Union, seeking to improve economic ties and secure a degree of political independence from Russia. On February 24, 2022, the world watched in disbelief as Russian forces surged across the Belarusian border, launching a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. What began as a distant conflict quickly morphed into a brutal reality for millions of Ukrainians. Cities that once buzzed with life transformed into battlegrounds, their streets scarred by shelling and littered with the remnants of war. The initial Russian offensive aimed to overwhelm Ukrainian defenses and capture key strategic objectives, including the capital city of Kyiv. The Ukrainian people, caught off guard but resolute in their determination to defend their homeland, rallied to resist the invasion. As the war in Ukraine grinds on, the eastern Donbas region has emerged as the epicenter of the conflict. This industrial heartland, scarred by years of fighting between Ukrainian forces and Russian-backed separatists, has become a crucible of violence. The besieged city of Mariupol has become a symbol of both Ukrainian resilience and Russian brutality. Despite facing overwhelming odds, Ukrainian defenders held out for months, refusing to surrender the city. In the Donbas, the front lines have become fluid, shifting back and forth as both sides engage in a grueling war of attrition. The war in Ukraine has had a devastating impact on the country's people, leaving an indelible mark on their lives and psyches. Millions have been displaced from their homes, forced to flee the fighting and seek refuge in safer parts of the country or abroad. Families have been torn apart, their lives upended by the violence that has engulfed their homeland. The United Nations estimates that over 10 million Ukrainians have been internally displaced, while millions more have crossed the border into neighboring countries. The psychological scars of war run deep, affecting not only those who have witnessed its horrors firsthand, but also those who have been forced to flee their homes. The economic ramifications of the war in Ukraine have been far-reaching, impacting not only the warring nations but also those drawn into their orbits. Belarus, already grappling with a fragile economy before the conflict, has found itself increasingly isolated on the world stage, facing the brunt of Western sanctions aimed at crippling Russia's war machine. These sanctions have had a ripple effect on the Belarusian economy, pushing it to the brink of collapse and fueling social discontent. The Belarusian ruble has plummeted in value, eroding the purchasing power of ordinary citizens and exacerbating an already precarious economic situation. Inflation has skyrocketed, making basic necessities increasingly unaffordable for many Belarusian families. The war in Ukraine has not only exposed the vulnerabilities of the Belarusian economy, but also revealed cracks in the facade of unity that Lukashenko has carefully cultivated over his decades in power. While public dissent has been ruthlessly suppressed, there are growing signs of unease and discontent simmering beneath the surface. The Belarusian people, bombarded with state-controlled propaganda, are increasingly skeptical of the official line. Images of the devastation in Ukraine, smuggled out by journalists and shared on social media, paint a starkly different picture from the sanitized version presented by state-run media. The economic hardship inflicted by sanctions has fueled resentment towards the government, with many Belarusians questioning the wisdom of their country's close alignment with Russia. Section 3, a gambit for survival, securing a place in the post-war order. Lukashenko's unexpected plea for peace in Ukraine has left analysts and policymakers scrambling to decipher his true motives. Is this a genuine change of heart, a recognition of the folly of war and the need for a negotiated settlement? Or is it a calculated gambit, an attempt to distance himself from a faltering Russian ally and secure a place for himself and Belarus in the post-war order? Some observers argue that Lukashenko, a shrewd political operator, is simply positioning himself for a future in which Russia may no longer be the dominant force in the region. By calling for peace, he seeks to present himself as a potential mediator, a neutral party capable of bridging the divide between Russia and the West. This, in turn, could provide him with much-needed leverage in any future negotiations regarding the lifting of sanctions and Belarus's place in a new European security architecture. Section 1. A ripple in the global pond, international reactions and skepticism. Lukashenko's call for peace, unexpected and jarring in its timing, reverberated through the halls of power across the globe. Western capitals, long accustomed to viewing the Belarusian leader as a Putin puppet, met his statement with a mixture of cautious curiosity and deep skepticism. The question on everyone's mind, was this a genuine overture or a carefully orchestrated charade designed to sow discord and buy time for a faltering Russian war effort? The initial response from the United States and its NATO allies was one of measured restraint. Statements emerged emphasizing the need for actions to speak louder than words. They pointed to Belarus's continued complicity in the Russian invasion, allowing its territory to be used as a launchpad for attacks on Ukraine, as evidence that Lukashenko's words rang hollow. The European Union, which had imposed sanctions on Belarus for its role in the conflict, echoed these sentiments. They called on Lukashenko to demonstrate his commitment to peace by ceasing all support for Russia's war effort, including closing Belarusian airspace to Russian military aircraft and demanding the withdrawal of Russian troops from Belarusian territory. However, despite the skepticism, Lukashenko's statement did succeed in one crucial aspect. It reignited the debate about the need for a diplomatic solution to the conflict. While Western leaders remain wary of Lukashenko's motives, they also recognize the potential value of keeping open lines of communication, however slim the prospects for a breakthrough may seem. Section 2, NATO's calculus, assessing the shifting dynamics of the Eastern Front. NATO, formed after World War II to counter Soviet expansion, is now back in focus due to the Ukraine war. Once focused on counter-terrorism, NATO now confronts Russian aggression in Europe. Lukashenko's peace call, met with skepticism, adds uncertainty to NATO's strategy. NATO bolsters Eastern Europe presence, aiding Ukraine, avoiding direct conflict. Fear of escalation with nuclear-armed Russia weighs on NATO leaders. Lukashenko's statement complicates NATO's delicate balancing act. Can Lukashenko be a broker for peace? The question remains open to debate. Skeptics point to his authoritarian rule, close ties to Putin, and role in the Russian invasion. His pronouncements have been contradictory, fueling doubts about his commitment. He oscillates between supporting Russia and calling for peace, often deflecting blame. Can he influence Putin? It's unclear. Putin shows little interest in compromise, yet dismissing Lukashenko's potential role may be premature. His direct line to Putin is unique. Facing economic struggles and sanctions, he may seek peace. Whether he can leverage this remains to be seen. Section 1, a fragile hope, the uncertain path to peace. Alexander Lukashenko's plea for peace, while shrouded in ambiguity and met with understandable skepticism, has nonetheless cast a spotlight on the urgent need for a negotiated settlement to the conflict in Ukraine. The war, now raging for over a year, has exacted a horrific toll on the Ukrainian people, leaving a trail of shattered lives, devastated cities, and a deeply uncertain future in its wake. While the path to peace remains treacherous and fraught with obstacles, Lukashenko's unexpected intervention serves as a potent reminder that dialogue, however difficult or improbable it may seem, must be pursued with unwavering determination. The alternative, a protracted conflict that continues to consume lives, destabilize Europe, and threaten the fragile post-Cold War order, is simply too horrific to contemplate. The road to peace in Ukraine will require painful compromises from all parties involved. Russia, its imperial ambitions thwarted by the fierce resistance of the Ukrainian people and the unity of the West, must abandon its delusional quest to subjugate a sovereign nation and return to the negotiating table in good faith. Ukraine, for its part, must grapple with the agonizing task of rebuilding its shattered nation while seeking justice for the victims of Russian aggression. The international community, united in its condemnation of Russia's illegal invasion, bears a moral imperative to support Ukraine in its hour of need. Humanitarian aid, military assistance, and unwavering diplomatic pressure on Russia are all essential elements in creating the conditions for a just and lasting peace. Section 2, the imperative of diplomacy, lessons from a year of war. The war in Ukraine stands as a stark reminder of the fragility of peace and the devastating consequences of unchecked aggression. It has exposed the shortcomings of international institutions and tested the resolve of alliances. Amidst the tragedy, there are glimmers of hope that a different path is still possible. The unprecedented unity of the West offers hope that the international community can act decisively to defend sovereignty and the rule of law. The courage and resilience of the Ukrainian people serve as an inspiration to all who cherish freedom. The war underscores the indispensable role of diplomacy in resolving conflicts and preventing future bloodshed.